Welcome to the Experience Darden podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Yonah Greenstein. Yonah is a second-year student in our full-time MBA class of 2024, and he and I recently connected to talk more about his background, how he decided to pursue an MBA, what led him to Darden, his experience here at the Darden School of Business, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here's my interview, Yonah Greenstein. Yonah, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brett. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
Yeah, it's great having you here. How's everything going? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. I'm currently up in New York City. My wife's up here, so I came here and surprised her last night for Valentine's Day. And my flight kept getting delayed, so I had to keep making up lies, because we said we were going to Zoom at a certain time. But I kept being like, give me another hour, give me another half hour. And she was probably very, very frustrated with me, but didn't show that. And then I made up for it when I burst through the door. So up here now, and it's always great to be back here and to see her.
You know, there's a movie in there somewhere, or at least a sitcom episode.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like a happy Valentine's Day. Thanks so much for taking some time out for the podcast. We always start with the same first question. Tell us a little bit more about who you are. What's your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm born and raised here in New York City. I think my family is obviously a big part of my upbringing. So my parents were artists and still are. My mom was a documentary film editor. My dad was an abstract painter. And then my dad actually became a rabbi during my early childhood, which was a pretty big transition for me. So I grew up, every week on Friday and Saturday, which is Shabbat, in the Jewish tradition, being the rabbi's son at synagogue, where I got asked a lot if I was also going to be a rabbi, and knew from an early age that I would not. But it was good to have that in focus early, and grew up all over New York, originally in Brooklyn, some Queens, some Long Island, went to school in Manhattan, so did a long commute there. The thing I was really passionate about when I was younger was basketball, which again is not necessarily what people would expect, and definitely do not have the genetic makeup for that. I'm 5'9" and could never touch the backboard. But the goal was to kind of maximize my talents as long as I could, and then go into coaching so I could maximize other more talented people than myself. So I went to college, a small liberal arts Division III school in upstate New York called Bard. Definitely not known for business, very far to the left on the liberal arts spectrum. Again, went there as an athlete when most people there did not know we had a basketball team. Had a really, really great experience there. I think kind of just enjoying the independence of it and really finding myself. Spent a lot of time obviously with basketball, but also in local communities. Again, Bard's a pretty rural place, and I missed being in a more urban environment. And I also knew I wanted to coach afterwards. So a good way to get experience coaching was to get involved in youth basketball. So I did that starting pretty much my freshman year at Bard. And pretty quickly I had this epiphany where I was seeing all these really talented young people in these kind of the post-industrial cities in upstate New York, where I was the proudest accomplishment of my life to this point, which is that, I overcame the odds and I'm playing small college basketball. Is I worked hard, but I had a lot of support along the way. And had this full circle moment, where I saw, a lot of the kind of lack of support not related to basketball and the young people I was working with. So kind of just started working with local communities up there and doing more and more non-basketball program in conjunction with basketball programs. So we would host, free basketball clinics, but have tutoring beforehand. We would bring people from local communities to come watch one of our games, but give them a tour of a college beforehand. And eventually grew up where we were providing free summer camps. Because the campus was pretty dormant during the summer, and half the day kids would do academic programming and half the day they would do basketball programming. And before I knew it, I had started a nonprofit through all these programs, very accidentally, called Dream to Achieve as an undergraduate. So at that point, my goal was still to go into, coaching, become the next Brad Stevens, who was a hot young coach at the time. So I had my senior night on Saturday, was on the road recruiting on Monday. Did not go to a lot of parties that year because I knew I would be like coaching my teammates the following year, my senior year of college. And over the next 2 years was my first paying job was as a full-time assistant basketball coach, which was a ton of fun. And I was still running my program on the side, which was growing. And I, was finding more and more meaning in the world of youth development and kind of not having basketball be the ends itself, but using it for something else. And eventually got to the point where I could raise enough money to do that full time. So I like gave up my dream career of being a basketball coach 2 years out of college, ran this kind of scrappy startup nonprofit full time at that point, did that for a few years, found that immensely rewarding. Also saw I like really had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know about how to run an organization, like anything about financial sustainability. I was just like, okay, like these are good ideas, so let's do more of them. But kind of burnt myself out a little bit there, and then came back to New York City. Knew I loved doing youth development, knew I loved connecting young people with different educational opportunities. So went to work at a much larger nonprofit called iMentor, and then spent almost 7 years there and like really grew up in a professional sense. It was like my first time in an office ever, right? It was like 4 years out of college, and worked in programming and partnerships there. Eventually, I was leading our 12th grade work in New York City, which was, supporting over 1,000 seniors in Title I high schools and helping them figure out their college and career goals through mentoring, and also doing a lot of our work with higher ed partners in New York and beyond. And at that point, I was like, okay, like, what do I do now? And I kind of, had this itch where I felt like I had a lot to learn, that I hadn't learned at that point. I was, managing a good amount of other people and responsible for other people's learning. And I knew I would need to continue learning to continue doing a better job there. And, that like kind of curiosity is what eventually, encouraged me to start looking at business schools, and thankfully brought me to Darden. And I can go into that too, but I'll pause there.
Oh man, so much to unpack there. So, New York City, basketball capital of the world. I think it still holds that title. Do you have a favorite basketball player from when you were growing up?
So my favorite player growing up was Jason Kidd. So I was my parents were not sports people. So when I went to my dad and I was like, hey, like I would love to go to a basketball game, he like called the Knicks up, was like, hey, I want 2 tickets for me and my son. And they were probably like, that's $500. And he hung up the phone immediately. And then he called the Nets, who are in New Jersey at the time. And they were like, like, please come. That's like $10 for the 2 tickets. So became a Nets fan. They got Jason Kidd, who's like this highly cerebral, unselfish player, which like I wasn't the most talented player, but I could be cerebral and I could try to be unselfish. So I really admired that. And now my favorite team is definitely like I also ran a travel basketball program, which is called an AAU program, for the last 5 years or so in New York City before I went down to Darden. So those would be my nights and weekends. And a lot of those kids are, playing D2 or D3 basketball now. So my favorite players and my favorite teams are all these small college players that I get to watch on weekends now because I used to coach them.
That's great. And New York City has a grand tradition of great point guards. A lot of great point guards came out. I don't know if you've seen the Stephon Marbury documentary. Super interesting. Kenny Anderson's from LaFrac City. There's a lot of people who pass
Yeah.
through New York, and I mean, there's a long, long list. So you go on forever. So
Oh, I'm from right across the highway in
yeah.
Rego Park, Queens. So know the Kenny Anderson story well. Lamar Odom's also from there. But yeah, hopefully I haven't sullied the tradition too much. My own lack of
So
talent.
well, it's a very interesting story. I say, we've done a lot of these. Haven't had too many opportunities to talk basketball, so I appreciate your indulging my questions. So, how did you get interested in Darden specifically?
So again, I had this kind of growing interest in potentially going to business school, which was again, I was ready to learn more. I think I was ready to deal with I think different problems. I was very much at kind of this big inflection point between high school and college, or high school in the future. But like you're at that point, you're dealing with a lot of other problems, right? Like poverty, housing. And I was, I wanted to kind of zoom out. And I had also seen how much the private sector was really starting to get involved, not just in funding, great social solutions, but in actually implementing them. And I, saw the future was going to be a lot of public-private partnerships. And if I was going to be effective in that future, I needed to know the private side too. So it was like, September. So it was pretty late. Decided to apply, maybe 3 months before round two is due, but I still didn't know anything about business school. So I started with, learning about the consortium, which I'm a proud member, a proud, fellow of. I don't know if that's the way to say it. And for those that don't know, the consortium is this amazing organization and also network that brings together and helps fund people who are committed to diversity in business. So once I found out that community existed, because beforehand I thought like business school was just people like burning down the rainforest to like make an extra buck. I wasn't sure if I would fit in values wise. So once I knew the consortium existed and I could get funding from it, quite honestly, I knew that would be my path going to, pursue my MBA. So Darden was one of the consortium schools. I knew my wife, again, would stay in New York. She's like the most interesting thing about me and the best part of my life. And she's an actor. So professionally, she's here in New York City. She's actually part of a new show now called Suffs that opens on Broadway in a couple of months. So go check that out when it does. So I needed to be something that was consortium and also commutable to New York rather quickly so I could sneak home for Valentine's Day. So, those were the logistical reasons. And then once Darden made that cut, it really rose to the top fairly quickly. The people I met through Darden were just, I think, the most genuinely themselves, the least robotic and the warmest. I've always found Darden, even from my first conversations, to be a place where I think first, again, because of the case method, people are very comfortable speaking out and sharing their stories and sharing their opinions. And two, it's like a place of like real collective striving, right? It's a place where a lot of people come to pivot careers, where people necessarily haven't been on like an elite trajectory since the time they were 15 or 16, how I've seen at some other institutions, but people are willing to be ambitious while still supporting each other, kind of going through a similar journey in a really unique way. And I love that about Darden. I remember like the week before my interview, I took like an impromptu trip where I borrowed a car and me and my wife came down and met like 5 people in less than 24 hours. And saw someone getting ready to get a tattoo, like slathering oil on themselves in their Ivy Gardens apartment, right? Grab coffee with another person. And everyone was just so welcoming and so genuine. And they also just talked about how, the larger community was really structured to bring people together through so many of our traditions, like first coffee, sections, learning teams, like how someone put it was like, do not underestimate the power of all these traditions that Darden has in just making people closer with each other. And I've really, really found that to be the case. So that was the first reason that I was really drawn to Darden. Second reason was academically, Darden is case method. And, I had come from a small liberal arts undergraduate experience that I found much, stimulating. It was what I was used to. And also, I think quite honestly, I'd be like bored out of my mind sitting in lectures all the time. And I knew almost everything that I'd be learning would be new. I hadn't taken a math class since high school, and it was really important for me to have an engaged hands-on learning process and to learn from as many people as possible. And I think, that's the reputation of the case method. And like my academic experience at Darden has more than lived up to it. Like I have really poured into that experience. I was out of college for 10 years before I came here, so a little older than the average student. And like I value my educational experience so much more as an adult and having worked for those years. And the last reason, quite frankly, was just career outcomes. I knew I wanted to pivot to consulting because I love the team-based nature of it. I love the variety of the work, but I love the fact that there was still the opportunity to focus on, education and public sector and social sector. And Darden, to this day, year in and year out, is an absolute powerhouse in preparing people who have no background in consulting to go to the best consulting firms in the world. And, I summered at McKinsey. I'll be going back afterwards. So Darden has more than lived up to its end of the bargain there.
All right. So you come to Darden, you're a brand new first year student. What was the adjustment process like for you, Yonah? You mentioned you hadn't been in school for about 10 years when you came to Darden. I imagine there were probably a few changes.
I loved it. I'll be honest. I think year 2, I think, is the tough transition, right? But year 1, also for context, so Darden starts in October. And we kick off with core, which is a pretty regimented, pretty intensive academic experience. And I got married in September because again, I had, already had that date set and didn't know I was applying to business school until fairly late in the game. So one of the biggest adjustments was planning my wedding while acclimating to Darden, which was actually very grounding in a sense, because I had this huge life celebration that really put everything else I was going through in perspective. But I'd say in terms of my adjustments, one was that and being away from my wife and just figuring out the best routine for us. So, we would have like movie night once a week where we would like, go on Zoom and watch the same thing at the same time and like always have to pause because like she was 2 seconds ahead of me and like her audio was like telling me what was coming next. So number one was just really like knowing my priorities and carving out that time to make sure we were connecting in that way. I think number two was just like learning so many new things, which was really liberating. And I felt like, it was a chance to learn more quickly. So like what I would always tell people, like if I'm in a debate with someone about like education, it's hard for me to learn something from that debate, right? Because like I'm on the defensive a lot. I already think I'm right. There's a part of my identity that's on the line as I hold that position where like, if I get something wrong in an accounting class, like I'm like, cool, like thanks for correcting me. Now I know how to do this. So there was like all this new learning going on very quickly in all these new areas. And I love that. And I think for me, it was figuring out like, okay, like how much of this do I need to really master right now? And like, when is it okay for me to just get to 75%? Right. And that's good enough when you're trying to learn 30 new things a day. And like my learning team was like so helpful when it came to that. I had an absolutely phenomenal learning team. We met 3 times a week, for the whole year and still grabbed dinner every quarter. And then the third adjustment was just, again, also something that was pretty liberating was like, my schedule was set. Like, even working beforehand, coming from like the COVID hybrid space, like I was setting a lot of my own schedule when I'd be visiting school sites, when I'd go to the office, when I'd schedule meetings. And like I came to Darden and, I was like a toddler again. They're like, okay, at 8 a.m., you're going to be here, right? Like you're going to have learning team. These are the people you're going to hang out with, right? Like we're either going to throw these like, those are your play dates, right? We're going to throw these like social events. And it was a big adjustment, but I really, really enjoyed it. Again, I got married a month in, and when I came back, that was also really helpful because I was like, okay, like what is actually important, right? As I move through this new routine. But it was all good my freshman year. Definitely, no, I shouldn't say freshman, excuse me, first year. At Darden, I felt like a freshman again, as you can tell hearing me talk about it. But I felt like I was like at the world's best summer camp for adults, especially coming from New York City, and still, I'm really grateful for that.
What's a good movie to watch at a distance like that? Did y'all discover any movies you really enjoyed during that viewing experience?
I mean, there was always the trade-off of who is going to pick the movie. Like, I don't know. I mean, choosing a movie can be it can be work in itself. But we watched everything, comedies, drama, you name it. We watched some good ones. We watched some Pixar in there. It was about the quality time in the company.
Yeah, no, you're right. Choosing a movie can be very, very complicated endeavor for sure. So you mentioned that maybe second year is a little bit more complicated than first year in terms of the adjustment. Why is that?
Again, I think I mean I could just speak from my own experience, but right, first year I think the goals are kind of given to you, right? Like you're going to come to a new place, you're going to hopefully get a job you're really excited about. You're going to meet a lot of great people. You're going to learn a lot of new things, and we're going to tell you, right, what the things are you're going to learn and how you're going to learn them. And when I came back second year, I mean, I was up here in the city over the summer. And I think like, in a very different adult world doing my internship and spending time with my wife and spending time with friends. And then I came back to Darden and like, I was thankful to have a return offer. So very, very grateful for that. So like I had to kind of set my own goals, right? In a very, very different place. And I don't think I was necessarily ready to do that initially. So I had to take time because there's always like so many cool things happening at Darden. But like, all right, like how am I actually going to prioritize the things I want to pursue? and how I want to spend my time. And I think it took me a real week or two to figure out, okay, right? Like first year was very broad, right? This year I'm going to go deeper in a lot of ways. It's going to be a little bit more depth and breadth. And I want that to be, a little bit more hands-on, not just learning kind of new theoretical things, but applying them. So, finding things to get involved with where I'd get to be involved with social ventures and educational ventures and things like that and actively work on them has been a big part of my second year. I'm doing a global client project with like a school network in Tanzania. I'm teaching, incarcerated learners through prep. I'm working on a joint project with PLE, Partners for Leaders in Education, on improving post-secondary outcomes, right? So that was kind of like the depth of the things I'd be involved with and how I'd apply my learning. And then also, right, like what people would I spend my time with? Right? And what else would I do? And I think I've tried to really invest in making sure I'm building the right habits by myself. Because, like, as someone put it, like, if you can't spend time taking care of yourself here at Darden, it's probably going to be hard when you're working 70, 80 hours a week in the real world. So, that's been one of my priorities. And again, just making sure I'm spending quality time and staying connected and building deeper relationships with like the so many amazing students and professors here at Darden. Like, I'd say there was a month stretch in Q1 where I had coffee with a different professor every single day that I had from first year just to like catch up with them and reconnect. And also just like ask them about their research and let them like nerd out. And I get to hear from a world expert on something I know nothing about and learn a whole bunch of stuff in like 20 minutes. And that was really cool. But it took me a couple of weeks to like, right, even think like, okay, like, that's a really great way to spend my second year. And I would honestly, right, I think it's probably something I should have spent a little bit of time doing over the summer too.
I really appreciate that. We haven't had this particular conversation on the podcast yet, but you're right. If you already have your job offer and all that energy in the first year, new student going through the core, going through the internship recruitment process, trying to find that internship, then if you get your job offer, you come into second year and it's like, well, what are we going to be about here in the second year? What are the goals? You really have to kind of define those for yourself, because some of that external stuff that helped give shape to the first year is not there in the same kind of way.
Yeah, and we're all very type A people, right? Who are, used to like, okay, like I'm working towards an outcome or I'm working towards accomplishing something. And I think the beautiful thing about second year is, for a lot of us, it's really not about that at all. And it's a real chance to develop those other muscles.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Prison Education Program. I think it's a really cool program. Had Greg Fairchild on an Office Hours episode. He and his wife Tierney run this program. Tell us a little bit more about what it's like from a student perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I'm super glad that they've had a chance to share the amazing work that they created and they lead. I'm not going to butcher like the history of it in any way because I'm sure I would not do it justice, and they've done a phenomenal job there. But from a student experience, right, prep is the opportunity. I think there's around 50 of us to teach business and entrepreneurship classes in local prison facilities. And to me, it was something that I had heard about as a prospective student from Eric Smith and his partner Jess, who is actually running it last year, who I met very, very early on and who are really, really good friends. So it's something I always knew I wanted to do. And I think it's exciting for a few reasons. One is, I mean, Darden is, I think, such a bubble, right? For me, I'm like such a New York City snob. Like Charlottesville already is pretty small. Then UVA is like another level beneath that. And then Darden, we're a little bit isolated in North Grounds, which I think leads to a really, really tight knit community. But it's easy to kind of get disconnected from the rest of the world. Like I tell people, like, I'm not used to waiting for anything at this point, right? We get free coffee every morning. Like I never really wait online for anything, right? Like I don't have to commute. Like this is probably like the peak inpatient I've ever been because we're so spoiled at Darden. So first, I think it's really great to step out of that to the prep program. And a lot of us will go, I'd say, like probably every other week to a different facility within an hour of Darden. And then the other aspect is the chance to make a real impact. The prison industrial complex is a pretty ugly, unwieldy thing in America. I've worked unfortunately, at the beginning of what is often a pipeline to that in the public education system. And I know, a lot of my former students who just did not have a lot of great options and have ended up in really difficult situations. So it was never lost on me that a lot of the learners in prep could very easily just be older versions of the students that, I spent 10 years trying to create opportunities for in different ways. But now, right at the other end of that funnel, it's really tricky for them in terms of the challenges they're going to be facing when they're released. So just the value of that was very powerful for me. And then lastly, I love teaching. I love, educating, I'd say in doses, right? Or else I do not have the patience to be a full-time teacher. And the chance to just be in that environment is very energizing to me. And it's also a test because again, I've learned a lot of new businessy things in the last year, but there's the saying, the best way to know something is to teach it. And now I have to teach it and make sure someone else could understand it. So it's been a phenomenal experience. I teach the entrepreneurship class, which supports a group of 10 learners who are preparing to be released at some point in the next 2 years and would like to start their own small business. So it starts by teaching them kind of entrepreneurship fundamentals in different ways. And now during the second half of the year, we're really supporting them in, okay, what business do you want to create? And now let's drill down, not just from a concept stage, all the way to a much more detailed business plan. And it's been tremendously rewarding.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for walking us through that experience. I think it's so cool for prospective students listening to this episode just to know about this program and the opportunity that students have here. Anything else that's been, a part of your second year that you would want to highlight?
Yeah, a ton of things. I don't want to just go on listing a bunch of stuff. And apologies for all the amazing things I'm forgetting. But or I would be sure to forget. But another thing that's top of mind for me, I'll give you two things I'm looking forward to now. One is I'm part of something called the Tri-Sector Fellowship, which brings together students from Darden, the law school, and the Batten, the public policy school. And every Wednesday we have dinner together. It's always great to get free dinner. And we hear from a different speaker who works at the intersection of some type of public-private initiative or partnership. So for example, we heard from I believe Darden alumni who runs like the small business campaigns with Amex. And we heard from a Darden alumni who's the head of global human rights at Mars. And essentially it's the idea that just knowing about one of these is not enough and that there's a lot that we don't know. So for example, a lot of newfound respect for lawyers and legal minds, because at almost every point, patents will come up, right? And as business folk, at least for me, I'm always someone who's enjoyed a good idea. I would never think to patent, right? 360 degrees of my good idea. Right. So we've talked about how important that is and when different organizations have gone through the patent process to bring something to life, right? Like Amex's Small Business Saturday. So it's a very cool space. It's a chance to, again, step outside of Darden just a little bit and kind of think about the possibilities in very real world terms. So I've enjoyed that. We have an upcoming trip to DC for a couple of days at the end of this month that I'm really looking forward to. And then just strictly in terms of feeling like a little kid again, I mentioned I'm president of the basketball club, which is the lightest lift of all the clubs, essentially just organizing pickup basketball games at Darden. But we do have a trip up to HBS next weekend, where every year they host a NBA-wide tournament. Last year there were 16 teams. So we'll be representing Darden, competing up there. And, last year we finished third, just a strong showing, and lost to HBS and this guy, Marshall Plumlee, in the semis, who's 7-1 and had played in the NBA for 2 years. And I spent the entire game just trying to hold down his arms every time a shot went up so he couldn't reach up and grab the rebound, and praying the refs would show mercy and not call the obvious fouls I was committing. So we just got the schedule. We actually play HBS again in the first round this year. So we'll see how that goes. But it's a chance to really travel with some good friends from Darden, play basketball, and feel like a little kid again. So looking forward to that next weekend.
That's awesome. I went to UNC, so very familiar with the Plumleys generally. So do you have one of those light blue New Jersey Nets jerseys that they occasionally wear these days? Throwback?
So I'm like a few degrees removed from my Nets fandom. since they moved to Brooklyn, and also since like I just started having my own seasons in college, it was harder to keep up. I don't. I do have somewhere an old Jason Kidd like gray jersey. It's pretty ugly. I feel like the NBA styles in the early 2000s are not quite at the same level they are now with Nike. But I do not have any updated Nets gear. But I'm always open to it if you have any ideas.
I'm sure they have plenty of ideas for how you can spend your money. They seem to do a good job of that. So, well, I'm wondering anything else you're looking forward to in the coming months. I know graduation's on the horizon, be here in just a few months. Anything you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and I think most of my classmates would say the same thing, is just spending quality time with other people. Now can be a bit of a weird time, right? Darden's on the quarter system, so time moves very, very quickly here. The way I describe it is we're never quite in the middle of anything ever. We're either normally starting something or finishing something. So I think it gives a real perspective. Like at the third quarter will end in a couple of weeks, and then we won't come back till mid-March. And then before we know it, it'll be graduation. So first is just spending time with people, grabbing first coffee, grabbing dinner. We'll have a beach week that I think will be much more subdued for me than maybe others, but just like getting quality time with as many people as possible, because I probably won't be 5 minutes from like 100 good friends anytime soon again. Two, I think, is kind of wrapping up some of the academic stuff that's been really, really rewarding for me this year. So I mentioned it earlier, but I'm working on a project with Partners for Leaders in Education, which is essentially a consulting organization within Darden, something I wish I knew about much earlier, that provides executive education and consulting to school districts throughout America. And it's a chance to still be involved in education, apply a lot of the business concepts I'm learning, and hopefully, support these districts and serving hundreds of thousands of students everywhere. So I'm working on a project with them about how districts can improve their post-secondary outcomes, essentially just college and career. So very much in line with what I'm passionate about and the work I've done before. And that's been fun because we've been working in a silo so far, and now we're starting to get feedback from districts and other partners. So really looking forward to pushing that project across the finish line. I'm working on an independent study with MTH, who is like just an absolute gem of a human being and so wise and so kind. And the focus of that independent study is how to build diverse pipelines kind of to anything. And then using the approach of how more diverse pipeline is built and applying that to business education. So I think, I'm a strong advocate for diversity, and I know Darden believes in it as well, but I think there's a lot of momentum often behind pretty short-term ideas because there's the need, okay, we need a more diverse class next year, right now. But so does everyone. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done in just expanding the funnel. As a basketball coach, one of my number one jobs when I was a college coach was recruiting. And one of the first questions I would, ask a 17-year-old when I was on the phone with them was, okay, like, what are you interested in studying? And I'd say 90% of male 17-year-old basketball players, when you ask them that question on the phone, will be like, oh, like something with business, right? And then I would always ask them, oh, what kind of business? And normally they were like, I don't know, like essentially, equating business with freedom and money, which is true to definitely to some extent. And I think that's the power of a business education. But I know very, very few of those same 17-year-olds 10 years later, right, even know what the opportunities are like in business education. And there's very little bridging that 10-year gap for a lot of those young people who have the potential to be, really transformative business leaders and also build generational wealth for their families. So that's been an exciting project. Again, I'm very, very lucky to work with MTH on it. So excited to continue working on that.
All right, Yonah, last question for you here. What's a piece of advice you would share with our prospective student listeners, something that you would encourage them to consider as they go forth on their own MBA journeys?
Sure. I would say three things, and I'll be brief with these, or as brief as I can be. But the first is, right, but just starting the application process, I would do the opposite of what I did. Again, I wasn't really aware of an MBA as a goal for myself until very, very late in the game. And I got very fortunate that I was able to end up at Darden, running through the process, including discovering, what the tests were and things like that in around 3 months. So I would give yourself considerable time to just take every step of the process really seriously, which brings me to my second thing, which is before starting an MBA, really figuring out why am I doing this, which the reflection that comes with the process is really helpful. But once you're entering an MBA program, really knowing why you're doing it and what your priorities are going to be. And I think I was fortunate enough to have a lot of life experience at that point, which made that clear, and also have a great life partner and have our wedding coming up, which really put things in perspective. But I think the people who have the best experiences I've seen at Darden and the friends I've met at other schools have that clarity coming in. And the people I've seen who sometimes, aren't always having the best time, it's because they feel like they need to get everything out of their MBA experience, right? They need the job, they need the good friends, they need a life partner, they need, right, to achieve in every way, they need to be a president of a club. And because there's so many amazing opportunities, it's easy to be spread thin or just to chase different things. If you don't take the time to do the work beforehand. And the third, I'd say it goes back to something I've been trying to work on is, right, once you're at an MBA program, take the time to build the personal habits that you want to build during your life afterwards, because there'll probably never be an easier time to build those habits. So by no means perfect in any of these regards, but I've definitely gotten better at going to yoga and, having a morning routine where I'm journaling or meditating. Those were things I was not doing nearly as much beforehand, and my wife's a great influence there. But like the pressure's on for me a little bit because I'm like, these need to be solid when I get out of here, because it'll be much more challenging, right, when I'm in my next environment. So would encourage people to, take a little bit of time just with themselves and figuring out the habits and routines they want to build as well.
Well, Yonah, thank you so much for the conversation today. Really enjoyed hearing your story, and thank you for also indulging all my basketball-related questions. Like I said, we don't get to talk basketball on the podcast quite as much as I would like. So thank you.
Oh, of course. Happy to talk Carolina hoops anytime, Brett. I really appreciate you having me. You taking the time. This is a tremendous honor and a ton of fun.
And that was my interview with Yonah Greenstein, second-year student in our full-time MBA class of 2024. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's Darden, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.